So welcome to this module, which is around diet and chronic pain and the link between the two, and what you can do to manipulate diet to make positive changes in terms of your management of chronic pain. So the module I'm going to be talking you through today will think about what do you mean by diet for chronic pain? You know, this is something often people haven't heard about. You know, how on earth can diet influence your management of chronic pain? We're going to be thinking a little bit about something called Mediterranean style eating, which is the cornerstone of treatment for diet with chronic pain. We're also going to be thinking about we don't want a dietary approach that's negative. We don't want something that's focused on cutting out all of your favourite foods, the things you enjoy in life. That isn't going to be helpful to you managing long term. So we really want to think about how can you still enjoy some of your favourite foods within the context of a Mediterranean style diet. We're then going to move on and think a little bit about changing habits, and particularly focusing on those tiny changes, very small changes you can make that you can build on, rather than doing anything too radical to begin with. Easy changes, just one or two things you can make a start with. We'll also be thinking a little bit about meal pattern and how for some people changing the way that you eat across the day or the way that you eat across the week might be helpful in trying to reduce some of those inflammatory responses in the body, maintain weight or even lose weight for some people. I also want to think a little bit about tips and hints for flare-up days, for days when you just can't manage to eat, you can't manage to prepare any food, and also the impact of diet on sleep as well. We'll then move on to thinking a little bit more about cooking and preparing food. What hints and tips can we think about in terms of trying to make cooking and prep as easy as possible and as simple as possible. I'll then move on to give you some hints and tips around weight management and pain for those people that want to try to manage their weight a little bit better. And finally, moving on to something called the plate model, which is thinking about how much of certain nutrients you have on the plate when you look at it. And then hopefully we'll have answered most people's questions around diet and chronic pain by the end. So how does diet relate to chronic pain? How can diet help us manage chronic pain? Well, we have quite a bit of research now. We know that people with chronic pain tend to have what we call higher inflammatory responses in their bodies. And we think that some of this inflammatory response makes chronic pain worse. And it also sits with other conditions, so things like arthritis, autoimmune conditions, higher body weights, diabetes. Those types of conditions all cluster, and an inflammatory type response seems to be common across most of them. So if we can look at diet in a sort of more of an anti-inflammatory way, we think we can probably help to reduce the impact of some of those. We also know that certain nutrients in the diet, if they're too low, can make sensations of pain worse. So, for example, vitamin D, if you've got low vitamin D levels, you're likely to experience some aches and pains. So overall, what we're looking for is a diet that is what we call Mediterranean in approach, which I'm going to talk about shortly. So it will have lots of vitamins and minerals in there, lots of things like magnesium and B vitamins. It will be quite plant-based, so it won't have too much red meat in there, or if at all. It won't have too much of what we call the saturated fats, the fats that tend to come from the animal products. It won't have too much sugar or too many processed foods in there. So we are looking at trying to reduce overall saturated fat and sugar intake, but we're doing that by focusing on increasing all the other things you need to do in your diet, which are vitamins and minerals, fruits and vegetables, olive oils, and helping people to manage their weight a little bit better to try to reduce that joint pain. So what is Mediterranean diet and why is it important in chronic pain? So Mediterranean style diet is a way of eating that's found in the Mediterranean countries, France, Italy, Croatia, etc., around that area. And one of the things we know from research is that the Mediterranean style diet has been tried with lots of different disease states and been found to be very, very positive in outcomes for helping people with things like diabetes, weight management, and mental health actually as well. So it's been very linked to improvements in people's mood, and it's been also linked to improvements in chronic pain. So we know from the research that people who followed Mediterranean style diets for over 6 weeks reported significantly reduced pain, and people that followed a Mediterranean style diet for over 12 weeks reported improvements in depression as well. So we're really looking at Mediterranean style eating as the way forwards for somebody experiencing chronic pain. Part of Mediterranean style eating is including lots more beans, peas and pulses and lentils. So what we're trying to encourage people to do is reduce meat in their diet, particularly red meat, and instead substitute them for beans, peas, pulses and legumes. So those would be things like chickpeas, red lentils, dals, black beans, haricot beans, any kinds of beans or lentils are fine. You can buy them in tins, and that's probably the easiest way to access them. You just rinse the tin out and pop them into whatever dish that you're making. We're asking people to have around 3 to 4 portions of oily fish a week. So oily fish is a particular type of fish, so it's not white fish, it's one that feels oily when you eat it. So it's things like pilchards, herring, mackerel, trout, sardines, and luckily those are quite cheap fish and you can buy those in tins. If you don't like oily fish, which lots of people don't, you can take what's called an omega-3 capsule or supplement. So it's the omega-3 that's found in the fish that's the essential ingredient. So if you don't like oily fish and you can't manage that 3 times a week, then taking an omega-3 oil capsule at high strength dose of 1,000 milligrams a day or more is what we'd be recommending. For vegetarians and vegans, if you can get the algae-based omega-3 capsule, they're probably the best ones that you can get. Or you can add some linseeds and walnuts to your diet as well. But just adding linseeds and walnuts on their own won't have the same result as having the oily fish. They're not as potent in the omega-3 that we need. So if you are vegetarian or vegan, we would encourage you to take one of the omega-3 algae capsules, as well as adding things like walnuts, seeds and linseeds to your diet. So adding in olive oil, Mediterranean style eating includes 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day, which to someone living in the north of England may sound a fair amount. Where people also ask, well, isn't oil fattening? Shouldn't we be doing, following a low-fat diet? Yes, to a certain extent is the answer, but not by reducing olive oil. So we want you to reduce the saturated fats in your diet, things found in things like cakes, biscuits, meat products, but we don't want you to skimp on things like olive oil and nuts. They're fats that are generally healthy and generally an essential part of that Mediterranean style eating. So in trying to introduce olive oil into the diet, you can cook with olive oil, you can add it to things like vegetables, potatoes, salads that you're making across the day. Some people actually take it as a shot. They put it in a glass and they just drink it. Olive oil can be expensive. If you can't afford olive oil or you've not got access to olive oil, then rapeseed oil is a good second substitute for that. Meat and sugar are 2 things that we'd like you to reduce if you're following a Mediterranean style diet, particularly red meat and packaged meat. So packaged meat would include things like sausages, burgers, meat products that you find in the freezer cabinet, packaged ham, chorizo, salami, any meat that comes in a packet basically are the ones that we need you to reduce. Fresh meat from the butchers, having smaller amounts and less often. What we'd want you to try to do is replace those meat products with more plant-based ones. So for example, in things like chilies or curries, you could have things like dals or lentils or beans instead of the meat products. When it comes to things like the sugary sweets and sweet treats, again, not having too many of those where you can afford to. Again, it's the shop-bought ones that we tend to want people to reduce. So again, in Mediterranean style eating, there are very few processed products. So it tends to be the shop-bought cakes, biscuits, sweet treats, crisps that we need people to reduce down. An odd homemade, cake is not going to be the end of the world. And often with homemade products, you can reduce the portion a little bit and you can manipulate the ingredients a little bit, and that does make it that bit healthier. So in a Mediterranean style eating plan, we have lots of something called fibre. So fibre is sort of what we call roughage in the diet. It helps, generally, it's the part of the diet that we then digest that goes all the way through the gut system and comes out the other end. So with fibre, we want people to make sure that they're having enough fibre across the day. So for adults, that's something called 30 grams of fibre, which is a bit meaningless as an amount. So as it says on the slides, one of the things you can look at doing is thinking about adding something with fibre in at each of those meals across the day. So we've given you some suggestions here for a day's diet that would include 30 grams of fibre. So that would include something like muesli or oats for breakfast, those oat-based products for breakfast, maybe with some fruit as well. For lunchtime, something like a jacket potato or whole grain rice or quinoa, with something like sweet corn, and another piece of fruit, something like grapes as well. For dinner, something like a chickpea and spinach curry is really high in fibre, and particularly again if you're adding something like brown rice to it. And a snack there again, something like wholemeal pitta, and we've included 4 squares of dark chocolate. So that would give you that diet with 30 grams of fibre in across the day. Just going to talk a little bit about fluid now. We've talked a little bit about the foods that we eat, but I just want to move on and think a little bit more about the fluid in your diet. So in terms of fluid in the diet, we are looking to have enough of that, particularly if you've managed to increase your fibre content of your diet. Perhaps you've put more chickpeas or lentils in your diet, perhaps you switched to wholemeal bread, and those would mean that your fibre content of your diet's increased, which means we need to increase the water content of your diet if we don't want to end up with constipation. So fluid really helps to keep the gut moving. And it helps to make the poo nice and soft when it goes through the gut system. So we want people to be drinking enough, but not too much. So what's enough? So generally speaking, between 6 and 8 glasses of water a day is enough. It doesn't have to be just water. You can include your tea in there. You can include squash. You can include small amounts of things like fruit juice. Provided those drinks are sugar-free, we're generally happy. But it's thinking roughly, how can I get between 1,500 mils and 2 litres a day fluid in as a minimum. We don't want people drinking too much fluid, and certainly I've had patients come through, drinking, litres and litres of fluid, thinking that's a good thing. And again, that's not necessary, and overhydration can be as dangerous as underhydration. So keeping things to around 2 litres or around 8 glasses of fluid a day is generally what we're looking for. Just moving on to thinking a little bit about salt in the diet. So you may be thinking, okay, how on earth would salt relate to chronic pain in the diet? Well, salt can have an impact on hydration, and hydration can have an impact on the joints in the body. So whilst there's not maybe a direct link there, it would be important to really think about having a diet that's not super high in salt. Most of Western diet is quite high in salt, and most of our salt products come from packaged and processed foods. So again, if you can get foods to be as fresh as possible, or you can make as many as yourselves as possible, you can generally reduce that salt intake down. It may also be worth thinking about how much salt you add to food. A little sprinkle of the salt shaker is generally okay, but often people add quite a lot of salt to food at the end of cooking in terms of seasoning it. What I would say is it can take a really long time for you to get used to lower salt content of the diet. So it takes around 3 months for our taste buds to get used to either lower sugar or lower salt products. So, you've really got to keep going with trying those lower sugar or lower salt options, and just reducing it down slowly. Reduce it down for a few months till you get used to it, and then reduce it down again for another few months till you get used to it. So most people can reduce the salt and sugar content of their diet down quite a lot if they just keep working at it in small chunks over the years. If you're taking out some of the salt in your diet, what you might want to do is consider adding more herbs and spices into your diet to make food taste nice still. So the good news is that some herbs and spices have been found to have a bit of an anti-inflammatory effect in the body, and that's very useful when you're trying to reduce down salt and you're trying to alter your diet to work towards a more of a Mediterranean style approach. So particularly spices such as ginger and turmeric are very helpful in a sort of anti-inflammatory approach to diet. And the good news is they go very well in things like chickpeas and in curries as well. So they are things that tend to go together. And if you already use things like ginger or turmeric in the diet, those are really good things to continue to do. So do we have any evidence for particular supplements to take when you've got chronic pain and you want to move towards a kind of anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean style eating plan? Well, we do have a little bit of evidence. We do have some evidence that actually magnesium can help some people, particularly with chronic pain, not everybody, but some people. We have some evidence that vitamin D can be very helpful as well for anyone that's experiencing pain, particularly joint pain. And something that I've mentioned already, which is called omega-3. So those are the things we have the most evidence for. What we would say generally is try them and see. We don't want people spending lots of money on expensive supplements if they have no benefit. So what we would generally say is, try them for between 6 and 12 weeks. If you don't feel you've had any benefit from those, stop taking them. But for many people, they do experience some improvements and want to continue to take those. We have some supplements which have been tried again in the chronic pain population and may be again useful for some people. So zinc, selenium and B vitamins as well do feature in the research. So again, very individual. Some people find them really beneficial. They think that they're really helpful with that management of chronic pain. Other people find them not as helpful and discontinue them. So these are all things to consider. These are all things that you might want to try, but they're by no means an essential part of the approach. Just a little bit of a word about vitamin D. Vitamin D is a vitamin that we find from the sunshine, but in the north of England particularly, we don't have enough of this vitamin. So everybody should be on a vitamin D supplement, particularly in those winter months or the more cloudy months of the year. So you're able to buy vitamin D supplements over the counter at most supermarkets and in most chemists as well. The dose is between 400 and 1,000 international units a day, but the standard vitamin D tablets that you'll get in most places over the counter in supermarkets or pharmacies will have adequate vitamin D in them. If you're worried, you can check with your doctor or your dietitian and just check that dose. For some people who have been found to have very low levels of vitamin D, maybe on a blood test previously, or if you've got symptoms of vitamin D deficiency, you may need a higher dose of vitamin D, certainly to bring your blood levels up and then to continue to maintain them at a level that's right for you. So again, that's something to discuss with either your doctor or your dietitian. I just want to talk a little bit about changing meal patterns and how this could be helpful for some of you. What we're really keen to do is for you to have a think about what are the foods or drinks in your diet that you really want to keep in? What are those things you really enjoy and life would really not be the same without them? It might be biscuits, it might be chocolate, it might be coffee. There might be certain aspects of your life that you think, right, those are the things I would really like to keep in my diet. And we would say for those particular products, fine, keep them in. It's just thinking about frequency and portion. So have a think, is it coffee? Is it chocolate? Is it a pizza now and again that you really, really want to keep in your diet? And then have a think about, okay, how often do I have that? And what portion do I have it in? So one of the things we're going to be asking people to do is instead of eating, for example here, instead of eating a whole chocolate bar in one go, it would be saying, okay, how can I make that chocolate bar last longer and have a smaller amount each day rather than, a whole one in one go? Other things we'd be thinking about are the environment, your food environment at home. So we know again from research that if you have lots of cakes and biscuits and sweet treats out on display in your home, your brain is more likely to want to eat those. Brains tend to see it and want to eat it. So one of the things we get people to really think about is hiding away any of those sort of sweet treats or buying them in much smaller portions. And actually on display, if you've got food on display that's say maybe fruit or vegetables chopped up, nuts, seeds or healthy snacks that are out on display, you're far more likely to eat those. So sometimes just changing what's around in your house and what you have in your cupboards can be really helpful in reinforcing some of those healthy habits. You know, if you're sat watching television and you've got a packet of biscuits next to you, you are likely to eat those. If you're sat watching television and you've got a bowl of chopped fruit next to you, you're likely to eat the chopped fruit. So people's brains tend to work on work quite simply in that way, in that they go for what's easy and quick and available. So make those healthy foods easy, quick and available, and put those slightly more unhealthy foods out of the way and out of eyesight. We'd also suggest buying those slightly unhealthy foods in smaller packages. You know, so if you're someone that loves pizza, buy it in some single slices. You know, you're just heating up a small slice each time. If you love biscuits, can you buy single packs of biscuits or packs of 3 biscuits? So even if you did eat the lot, it's 3 biscuits, it's not a whole pack of biscuits. So it's really thinking about portion frequency and what's on display in the house, and really trying to get a little bit smarter with thinking about single portions of things, smaller portions of things more often, and putting away the larger portions, at the back of the cupboard. We also want you to have a bit of a think about your food pattern in terms of adding a little bit more in. So we want you to be thinking about, okay, what can I add in rather than what can I take out? So have a think about your breakfast or the first time you eat something in the morning. You know, what could you add to that? What's one thing you could add to breakfast to improve that? Could you add an apple to breakfast? Could you add a couple of nuts to breakfast? Could you add a few seeds to breakfast? These are all things that would really help improve the nutritional quality of breakfast. If you like something hot, could you chuck in some tomatoes? Could you slice some mushrooms? You know, are there some things you can add to whatever you're having at breakfast to improve that nutritional quality? Likewise at lunchtime, you know, depending on what you're having at lunchtime, can you add some fruit to it? Could you have some chopped vegetables with it? Could you add some seeds or olive oil to lunch to improve that nutritional quality? So have a think about what you're having already and what can you add to that? What would be a couple of things you could add to lunch to really improve that nutritional quality? Again, dinner time doesn't have to be big changes. Think about what you're having already. You know, what could you have with it? Could you add some extra onion or garlic? Could you add some beans or peas to it? Could you add some tinned tomatoes? Could you, again, put some olive oil on top of something? So just small changes, 1 or 2 things that you can think about, starting with one at a time, adding them in very slowly over the weeks. What are some things you can add into your diet to improve that nutrition? So if you're thinking about changing your diet, where to make a start? You know, we've covered a lot of material already about things you could try, but where are you going to start with things? And one of the things we'd ask people to be thinking about is, writing down where you're going to start. What you're going to start with doing. Don't make too many changes at once. Don't try to change everything at once. You know, start with 1 or 2 things. What are you going to change in the day, and how are you going to change that? So if you're going to add an apple to breakfast, have you got apples in? You know, how are you going to make sure you remember that apple at breakfast? And what is going to get in the way? You know, think it through. Imagine you're doing this tomorrow at breakfast. What's going to stop you? Do you forget to put the apple on your plate? Are you in a rush and it feels like it takes too long to eat? Did you just forget to do it all together? You know, what's going to help you get round some of those things? So, for example, getting it out the night before, setting a reminder on your phone, asking someone else in your house to prompt you to have it. And a lot of times it's around habits and habit forming. So once you've had that apple with breakfast 15 to 30 times, you're more likely to remember to do it because it will become a habit and then it will become automatic. So it's thinking about really putting a lot of effort into changing those first couple of weeks worth. After you've got a couple of weeks worth under your belt, you know, those will become more natural habits and you'll remember to do them. One of the things that people can do in addition to Mediterranean style eating is thinking about changing their meal pattern across the day to help them to manage weight or manage inflammation. Now, I want to start by saying that this isn't for everybody. You know, if you're low weight, if you've had disordered eating, or you've got disordered eating or a poor relationship with food, this is not something to start doing. But for somebody whose maybe weight is higher or they're a normal weight, they think they have got inflammation in their body, maybe they've got some diabetes, they've got some joint problems, they've got some chronic pain, then changing their eating pattern across the week or the day The research tells us that it can be very useful and helpful to people in trying to manage some of that chronic pain and also manage their body weight as well. So what I mean by this is eating less on 1 or 2 days a week. So it's something that you may have heard of, which is called fasting or intermittent fasting. And it is, the research tells us though it's no magic formula, it does help some people to reduce their calorie intake. And it particularly seems to be helpful for people with things like joint problems and arthritis. So intermittent fasting is where you deliberately eat less on 1 day, 2 days or 3 days a week. What we would say with, or you can start by changing what you eat over the day, the meal pattern over the day. So for example, you could eat less in less hours over the day. So we would normally think about, most people may get up fairly early and start eating at say 7 o'clock in the morning and finish eating at 7 o'clock at night, and that's a 12-hour period that they eat over the day. With intermittent fasting or delayed time feeding, we're asking people just to have a 6 to 8 hour window of the day where they eat. So they might not start eating till 11 o'clock in the morning, and they may finish eating at something like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So their eating window over the day is a lot smaller, and they're fasting for far longer over the rest of the day. So if you do decide it's something you want to go for, when you're fasting, you can have drinks without sugar in them. But you can't have anything with milk in it because it would break that fast. So tea, unfortunately, you can't drink tea and coffee outside of that eating window, which is a bit of a deal breaker for some people. Doing the meal pattern over the week, you would need to reduce what you're eating down on 2 days a week. But I would usually suggest people start with 1 day. See how you go with eating a lot less on 1 day a week. Choose a day when you're not as busy, when you've not got any sort of physical demands going on. You don't want to choose a day when you want to feel energized and you've got to have enough energy to do things. It tends to be better on a day when you're doing some more sedentary activity, or you've not got to go out or rush around. So for most people, it would be reducing down to something by an amount which is just 500 calories a day. And that's quite a small amount of food. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll see that there's some 250 calorie meal ideas. So it'd be having 2 of these in a day. So it might be having something like carrots and some hummus in the morning, and some fresh vegetable soup and a roll in the afternoon. Or it might be having something like peanut butter and rice cakes in the morning, and a pita bread with an egg in the afternoon. So it's not very much food, it's quite a small amount of food over the day. And if you start on 1 day and you manage that, then maybe a week or 2 later you can try 2 days. Some people do build up to having at least 2 or 3 days a week where they eat a lot less. It sounds a bit counterproductive, but by having less on those 1 to 2 days a week, we find that people don't eat more on the other days. They actually reduce what they eat on the other days as well. So it's a good way for people to manage weight who have tried other methods and not managed it. One way we like to help people to think about making changes, particularly around diet, is to think of things in terms of tiny habits. So there tends to be 3 ways of changing habits, for changing people's dietary regimes and changing their habits. One is to change the environment completely, to take you out of the north of England and zoom you into a Mediterranean country where things are very different. Another way is to have a sort of overnight epiphany and change everything at once. The third way is to change tiny things in your diet one at a time. The first 2 are not for most people, so we tend to work on those small tiny changes. So one small tiny change might be taking a vitamin D tablet or an omega-3 tablet, and we would want you to link that change to something you're doing already. So it says in here, the example would be putting a tablet next to your toothbrush, because brushing your teeth is something you're doing at least once a day, or putting something like Brazil nuts or tablets next to the kettle, because again, going for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee is something most people do at least once a day. So we would say make one small tiny change and do that for at least a week or a fortnight before trying to make another tiny change. So one thing you can do is, pick a habit that you want to change, link it to something that you already do, like making a cup of tea or brushing your teeth or getting changed for work or taking the dog out, and add that in there. Add it in a very small amount. So rather than thinking, I've got to eat a whole packet of nuts, add in 1 nut or 2 nuts to begin with. It's the change in habit that's important, not the amount that you're doing. You can build the amount over time. And sometimes starting with the smallest amount or the single easiest version of the thing you're trying to change is what makes it really doable. If you think about perhaps feeling overwhelmed by adding in 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day, if you're only adding in a teaspoon, or even half a teaspoon, it seems a lot easier. So start there. How can you add half a teaspoon? How can you add a teaspoon? Well, actually, I usually, perhaps have a bit of salad with something I have at lunchtime. Okay, so add that half a teaspoon of olive oil to that salad and make that a daily habit if you can, and then build on that. So after you've built on those habits and you've managed to include that tablet or that olive oil or that piece of fruit over the week, reward yourself. You need to celebrate that. You need to say, well done, I've done something positive and I want to build on that for the next week. So start tiny and build is the way to go. So how can diet affect things like sleep and sleep quality? Well, we know that caffeine, for example, has a really long effect, particularly in some people. It can last between 8 and 10 hours in some individuals. So even having that cup of coffee at lunchtime can still have an effect into the evening, or can have an effect on upsetting people's stomachs, in the rest of the day. So caffeine, energy drinks as well, drinks with caffeine in them. And sugar sweetened drinks as well. So fizzy drinks or drinks that are very high sugar can all keep people awake and disturb sleep. There are nutrients that we can add into our diet that can help promote better sleep. So things like adding calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A, C, D, E, and K. So rather than worrying about too much taking those vitamins in single supplements, what we'd say is have a healthy diet and try and include some foods that have those vitamins in across the day. So typically milk has, for example, milk and milk-based products have a lot of those vitamins and minerals in them. So saving up your dairy product at the end of the day and having something like a milky drink or a yogurt before in bedtime or within the evening time would hit the spot for getting those vitamins and minerals in at the end of the day. There are some dietary components that can make a bit of a difference as well to the quality of your sleep. We know that, again, Mediterranean diet with lots of plant-based products, some lean meat products and some high fibre products can all help improve people's quality of sleep as well. Not going to bed too hungry or too full or with a tummy that doesn't work very well can all be helpful. So sometimes manipulating diet and all the dietary pattern across the day can help people to achieve a better quality of sleep. So what to do about flare-up days? We understand that when mental health is worse or physical health is worse or pain is worse, preparing fresh foods or eating in a way that's very healthful isn't always possible. And actually, eating at all can be really difficult. People may not feel like eating. And if you do feel like eating, what you want is something quick, something tasty, something you can get down very quickly that requires little effort. So rather than turning to things like packets of biscuits or chocolate bars, we would say, try and have a think about a plan B. Think about those flare-up days in advance. So if you can manage nothing else, then a cereal product, something like Kellogg's style cereals that have vitamins and minerals in them. If you look on the back of the packet, it will show you whether it's got vitamins and minerals in it. So typically those Kellogg's type style cereals will have vitamins and minerals in them. So if you have a bowl of cereal and if you add a piece of fruit to that, and some milk with that, you'll actually have pretty much a complete diet, everything you need in terms of things like proteins and carbohydrates and fibre and vitamins across the day. So having a bowl of cereal with some milk and a piece of fruit 2 or 3 times a day is enough for you to know, actually, I fed myself really well today in terms of nutrition. It's been very, minimum effort, but actually, in terms of nutrition, I've done really well. Other products that you can think about, if you're tempted to go for those chocolate bars, those biscuits, hot chocolate is pretty good. A milk-based hot chocolate, particularly a low-fat one or one with a bit less sugar in. Ready prepared stuff that's to hand, things like frozen ready meals, particularly the plant-based ones. Soups and stews are great. So casseroles, soups, stews, things that are very quick and easy that maybe you've got in the freezer or that you've just got to heat up in a couple of minutes in the microwave can be very helpful. Other products, you could make, blend and freeze as well, in advance. If you're really stuck, you could use some liquid nutrition as well. So products like Huel or Complan or other build-up type drinks that you can find in supermarkets can offer some good nutrition as well. But yeah, they're not necessary to have. A bowl of cereal, a piece of fruit and milk will cover it. So for Plan B days, for flare-up days, try and have some stocks of ready meals in the freezer if you can. Batch cook when you're feeling able to, or if any friends and family can cook and get some stocks in the freezer or the back of the fridge. Try and use nutrition products if you want to, things like Complan and Huel, etc., although they can be expensive. And if you have a bad day and you have a chocolate bar, you do. It's not about being critical or beating yourself up about that. It's about saying, okay, what can I do differently next time, and how can I make tomorrow better? So what to do around food preparation when you haven't got any energy, you're not feeling great in yourself, you've got a lot of pain over the day. So the 3 P's really are pace, plan and prioritise. So we'd really get you to think about pacing yourself over the day. So for example, thinking about breaking down tasks into smaller parts over the day. If you've got a recipe that does require a bit of preparation, can you do a little bit in the morning? Can you do a little bit at lunchtime? And then you finish it off in the evening, for example, rather than doing it all in one go, which might be a real energy drain, particularly at the end of the day. Think about what your priorities are. How can you make things simple for yourself? Your priority is to feed yourself here. You may have carer duties where you've got to feed others, but yours should be the priority here. How can you manage across the day to prioritise your needs and feed yourself across the day? What can you do in terms of making some shortcuts? Can you have some freezer staples? Can you buy chopped vegetables, chopped onions, things like garlic and ginger that are already chopped or minced up for you? But buy where you can, cheat basically, and buy things that are already chopped and already prepared. Other cheats, ways of doing things might be to use things like air fryers rather than putting the oven on, where you've got to bend down. It takes a long time to cook, it uses a lot of energy. So things like using blenders or air fryers can be really quick ways to get something nutritious in without having to expend so much energy. Think about using one-pot recipes as well. So can you use recipes where everything just goes in one pot? You've got minimum washing up there and less energy using lots of utensils or lots of saucepans. There are some really good recipe books out there and some other websites as well, and the Rethinking Pain runs cookery classes for people as well. So really utilise the resources out there. Can you have a look at some of the recipe books for simple and quick recipes? Can you learn how to cook smarter? Cookfulness is a recipe book that was designed and developed by somebody who has chronic pain themselves. And there's some really nice sections in that book that aren't necessarily about the food, but are really about how to manage, around diet and how to manage chronic pain. So one of the things in Cookfulness that's really helpful is really what we call an exercise, a mindfulness exercise to stay in the present. So it helps you to think about, rather than thinking about the past or the future or worrying about what might happen or what has happened, it's thinking about staying in the moment now with the food. What's in front of you, what can you enjoy in this moment? And one of the exercises in the cookbook takes you through how to do that. Some of the recipes in some of the cookbooks for people with chronic pain include ingredients that we would look for on the Mediterranean style diet, things like olive oil, and turmeric. So here is a recipe, for example, of curried roast potatoes, which uses rapeseed oil and turmeric as 2 of its key ingredients. So cooking tips when you've got chronic pain would be, again, to pace, to plan, to prioritise. So finding recipes that take a very short amount of time to prepare. Use a perching stool. So this is a really good idea for people, in the kitchen. It really saves you energy. It's not a stool that you sit on with full weight. It's a stool where you perch. So you are upright and you can carry out tasks like chopping or moving around to collect different food items. But it does allow you to rest at the same time. So a perching stool is a really great investment. Also, think about using a trolley in the kitchen. So if you have a trolley with all of the things that you need on at the right height, you're not bending down, you're not going from one side of the kitchen to another side to get everything ready. Everything's there with you where you need it on the trolley in front of you at the right height. So thinking about just preparing and organising that kitchen environment in a way that makes life easier for you. So in terms of preparing meals, think about your energy across the day. So that's really what pacing is all about, is thinking about doing something, resting. Doing something else, resting, rather than doing everything and running out of energy. So think about, breaking your meal prep down. Can you prep the vegetables in the morning? Can you cook the meal in the afternoon? Can you reheat it in the evening? Can you buy frozen ready meals that you just put in the microwave and you do the heating, so all of that preparation is taken out? You don't need to pre-prep things. So sometimes I get asked about, well, aren't ready meals processed? Aren't they really bad for you? And what I would say is ready meals that where it's all fresh ingredients but they are ready chopped for you are absolutely fine. There's no artificial emulsifiers, there's no artificial extra ingredients added to those. It's just a fresh meal that's been ready chopped for you, and those are fine. The processed meals we'd say to keep off are the ones where you turn the packet over and there's a big list of ingredients that aren't fresh foods in there, and those would be the ones we would say to maybe steer clear of. So tips around pacing, planning and prioritising when you're shopping. Think about, again, pacing yourself. Don't do one big shop at once. Think about doing smaller shops on a more of a daily basis. Take your time. Have a rest if you need to. Don't rush around. Make sure you've got a list that follows the items in the supermarket. So you are not going from one side of the supermarket and back again. You're just doing one trip around the supermarket in terms of going up and down the aisles. If you can, shop at quieter times. That can really help to reduce the stress and the sensory input. Avoid those really deep trolleys where you've got to lean over and get to the bottom of the trolley. Have a trolley that's smaller, that's higher up, and that can be quite helpful. And again, if you can avoid shopping and you can do an online shop, or you can get somebody to set up that online shop for you, again, that can be really helpful because the food will be brought to you rather than you having to go out to buy it all. You could do a big online shop once a week and just go daily to get smaller items that you would like to have a look at yourself or like to search out yourself. Other tips for shopping might be to push the trolley rather than using shopping bags. Putting heavy items into different bags so that you distribute the weight between all of the bags rather than just having those heavy items in one bag. And when you are packing, if you can think about putting your freezer items in one bag, your fresh items in another bag, it can help when you're getting them out the other end, so you can group them together. You're not having to go into lots of bags and put them into lots of different places once you get home. And obviously, if you can get any help from anywhere, use friends, use family. It's about prioritising your needs and what you need to be doing to keep yourself well. The freezer section at your local supermarket or your local shops can be very, very useful in trying to look for foods that are already prepared. So they're often ready chopped vegetable mix, ready chopped onion mixes, sometimes ready prepared soups or casserole mixes already done for you with all of the herbs already in them. One thing that's brilliant is frozen jacket potatoes that are already cooked, that you just have to reheat for a minute or two in the microwave. They're already cooked, you don't have to cook them, so they're super quick and super healthy. Plant-based microwave meals, those kind of vegetarian or vegan meals that are plant-based. And of course, batch cooking if you have the time and energy to do so on some days, so that you have those ready for other days. Store cupboard favourites as well can be really helpful. So thinking about what you've got in your cupboards, have a look in your cupboards and think about, okay, what can I add into my cupboards that's going to help me move my diet in the right direction? Can you add tinned chickpeas? Can you add tinned kidney beans? Can you add tinned vegetables? Ginger puree, garlic puree? These are all quick and easy ways to add extra things into the diet that are going to be helpful and useful. So some tips and strategies for weight management. I often get asked about this. Often patients with chronic pain have difficulties with their weight. You don't tend to be able to move as much. Often people are on lots of medication that doesn't help. There's all sorts of reasons. What I would say is one of the absolute priorities is to really address your relationship with food first. So really think about reduce, if you binge eat, if you've got a poor relationship with food, if you eat emotionally, tackle those things first. It's going to be very difficult to put other dietary things in place if you've got a really poor relationship with food. So the Rethinking Pain team can help you with a screening tool. They can help you to identify if you maybe emotionally eat or you binge eat. And those things that, those diet patterns and those that relationship with food must be addressed first. It's no use asking someone to go on a diet when they don't have control over their food intake. Second step is to plan. Plan. Really think about, okay, what am I eating when over the day? What am I eating when over the week? If you have a food plan, it's very, very easy then to think about unplanned food that comes in. So if you've got a plan for the week and you find on a Tuesday night suddenly you've got loads of unplanned food that wasn't on the weekly schedule, why is that? Focus on the reasons why that food came in. Was it because you were tired? Was it because you were hungry? There are reasons why people have unplanned food, and one of the people that you're working with, a health coach or one of the team, can help you to unpick that a little bit. But having a plan helps you to see where the unplanned food comes in and why. Improve. Work towards improving things slowly with diet. Make one change at a time. Focus on those small daily habits, focusing on adding healthful things into the diet rather than taking too much out to begin with. Then if you want to introduce some ways of reducing your calorie intake down over the week, again, do that slowly. Where do I think I have the most calories over the week? Where's my energy intake higher over the week? What can I do to reduce that down a little bit? What steps could I make to make that a smaller amount or less often? We're really aiming for 5% weight loss. If you're going to lose weight, don't be thinking of trying to lose, kilos and kilos and kilos. Think about a moderate amount of weight loss. If you can get a couple of kilos off and keep that off, then that is a brilliant achievement, and that's what we'd be looking for, rather than people losing lots and lots of weight and then regaining that back again. So think moderate, think small changes, and think of doing it in the right way and working through that the steps that I've put on the slides there. I just want to move on to thinking a little bit more about the plate model. So the plate model is quite a useful guide when thinking about what your plate looks like. We've got a plate of food in front of you. What does this plate of food look like, and in what proportions am I feeding myself? So you'll see there that we've got a kind of ideal plate model with vegetables and fruits, which is half the plate. And then we've got things like meat, fish, and beans, peas and pulses, which is about a quarter of the plate. And then another quarter of the plate is things like bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, noodles, chapatis. So when you've got a plate of food in front of you, we need it to look like that. So on one side of the plate, we've got the ideal kind of theory plate, and the other side is what it looks like in practice. So you can see there that person holding the plate has about a quarter of a plate of rice, a quarter of a plate of seafood, and half a plate of vegetables and salad. And that's the proportions that we need your plate to look like. Got some other examples here of plate models. So for example, if your plate looks like half a plate of rice and half a plate of chicken or half a plate of curry, we would want to swap that to looking more like this plate. You can see here the portion of rice is much smaller. It's around a quarter of the plate, and most of the plate is vegetables and chickpeas. So the vegetables and chickpeas sections have been combined, but the rice portion is a lot smaller. For example, again, we've got a sandwich there that doesn't show much fruit and vegetables, and it shows quite a large amount of white bread and some meat inside that. So again, we'd be saying, in terms of the proportions, have less bread, have more of the protein product. So this protein product has got egg instead of meat, but have more of that protein product and a lot more of the vegetables or salads in there. So you can see that the proportions on that's one side are very different to the other side. So if you're thinking about, if your sandwich on the left is something that you're generally having, thinking about how can I modify that portion? How can I reduce the bread down? How could I swap the meat out for something that's more plant-based? And how can I include more fruits and vegetables on that plate? Again, if we look at these two examples, we've got a plate with some potatoes there and some chicken. We really want that to be swapped so that you've got a smaller portion of the potatoes, and the chicken, rather than being deep fried chicken, is more of a roast chicken portion, and we've added some vegetables there as well for that balance. So it's more like a third and a third, rather than just half potatoes and half chicken. Another example here is with a pasta dish. So you can see one of those pasta dishes has some pasta with sauce and possibly some meat or some fish in there, but it doesn't really have any vegetables or salad. So again, we need to swap that proportion. So you've got around a third to a quarter of a plate of pasta, a third to a quarter of a plate of the meat or the fish product, and then a lot more fruit and vegetables on that plate. Again, another example here. So one section has a very large amount of rice and a large amount of meat. So again, if you're looking at changing that, we can change that for a smaller amount of rice, a smaller amount of meat, and a lot larger portion of vegetables on that plate. Another example here, so one of those plates has double carbohydrate, so it has chapatis and it's got rice on with quite a small amount of chickpea curry. So we would want that to be swapped to having rice or chapati, or just a very small amount of both, as in this plate. So that rice and chapati between them only take up around a third of the plate. And then we've got 2 portions of vegetables on there and a smaller amount of the kind of spiced meat on this plate.